There's a certain kind of person who unsettles manipulators without even trying. They don't raise their voice, they don't threaten, they don't posture. They simply see through things, quietly, effortlessly, as if their mind is calibrated to detect what others overlook. And if you've ever been around someone like this, you've felt it. That subtle pressure to be honest, to drop the performance, to speak plainly. Because on some instinctive level, that they won't fall for games. These people carry a kind of stillness, a groundedness, a psychological clarity that can't be easily penetrated. They don't react the way manipulators expect. They don't chase reassurance. They don't crumble under guilt. They don't get pulled into emotional quicksand. But the most striking thing? They often learn these abilities the hard way, not from books, not from theory, but from surviving environments where manipulation was the default language, homes filled with tension, workplaces built on politics, relationships where affection came with conditions. Over time, they developed silent behaviors, the kind that don't look powerful on the surface but reshape every social interaction around them. Behaviors that protect them from emotional traps, subtle persuasion, and hidden agendas. Most people never notice these behaviors, but manipulators do. Instantly, because when manipulation fails, it fails fast. Like a match that won't ignite, no matter how many times it's struck. In this video, we're going to explore 6 silent behaviors of people you simply cannot manipulate. Decoded through psychology, real-world patterns, and the invisible dynamics that operate underneath human behavior. But before we begin, remember, this isn't about becoming cold or distant. It's about becoming clear. It's about reclaiming the inner stability that makes manipulation impossible. If you're ready, let's step into the first layer of this psychological armor. Manipulation rarely starts with a dramatic moment. It doesn't arrive as a threat, an order, or an obvious lie. It begins in the quiet places, in the subtle spaces where your mind fills in the blanks. A look that makes you doubt yourself, a pause long enough to make you explain more than you should, a compliment that feels slightly too precise, designed to soften your guard, a small guilt seed planted so gently that you don't even notice it growing. The truth is, people are manipulated not because they're weak, but because human psychology is wired to avoid conflict, seek belonging, and trust patterns we already recognize. Manipulators exploit these tendencies. They depend on your emotional autopilot, the unconscious scripts you run without realizing it. And this is the invisible problem. Most people don't notice manipulation because they're busy managing their own emotions. They're trying not to offend, not to fail, not to disappoint, not to lose something important. They're negotiating internal fears while someone else quietly rewrites the rules of the interaction. Meanwhile, people who can't be manipulated operate from a different psychological baseline. They don't rush to fill silences. They don't interpret tension as danger. They don't attach meaning to every micro-expression. They don't fear being misunderstood. Instead, they sit inside the moment with clarity. They watch the emotional currents instead of drowning in them. They listen, but they don't absorb everything. They question their own impulses instead of acting on them. And because they aren't running on emotional autopilot, they can see exactly when someone else is trying to steer the wheel. If this is already opening your mind, consider liking this video. It helps the channel reach more people who need this kind of clarity. Years ago, a social psychology researcher conducted an unusual experiment. He invited participants into a room, one by one, and paired each of them with an actor instructed to subtly manipulate them. Nothing aggressive, nothing obvious, just small psychological nudges. A guilt cue here, a sympathy cue there, a slight pressure to agree, a carefully timed sigh. Most participants responded exactly as predicted. They bent, they softened, they apologized for things that weren't their fault. Some even offered help when nothing had been asked. But a small minority behaved differently. They didn't push back, yet they didn't yield. They weren't rude, yet they were immovable. They watched the actor with a kind of quiet curiosity, as if observing the emotional temperature rather than reacting to it. One woman in particular stood out. The actor attempted guilt, and she simply nodded, without absorbing it. He tried urgency, and she sat with the silence. He hinted he was disappointed, and she responded with steady neutrality. Later, when asked what she had felt, she said something simple. "I didn't feel responsible for his emotions, so I just listened." That single sentence revealed more than she realized. It was the psychological thread that separated her from the rest. A mindset that disrupts manipulation before it even begins. People like her don't win through force. They win through emotional independence. They refuse to carry emotions that don't belong to them. And that's one of the foundations of being unmanipulable. If you're fascinated by the hidden architecture of human behavior, subscribe to Inner Truth Lab so you don't miss the next insights. Here's the moment most people never see coming. Manipulators don't fear strength. They fear clarity. Strength can be challenged. Confidence can be flattered. Aggression can be redirected. But clarity is unmovable. Clarity is silent armor. Clarity short-circuits the emotional leverage manipulation depends on. And this is the core insight. People you can't manipulate have removed the hooks that manipulators use. Manipulators succeed by attaching themselves to 4 psychological vulnerabilities: your need to be liked, your fear of conflict, your desire to explain yourself, your habit of absorbing other people's emotions. The unmanipulable person disrupts each one of these, not by force, but by inner structure. Their mind operates more like a calm observer than a frantic responder. They don't rush to fix discomfort. They don't hand over emotional control just to keep the peace. Most importantly, they don't interpret someone else's reaction as a judgment of their worth. That alone removes 70% of manipulation attempts instantly. This type of clarity is not loud. It doesn't posture. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up in stillness, in the ability to pause before reacting, to question the emotional meaning of a situation, to stay grounded when someone else tries to disrupt the psychological balance. Manipulation thrives when you're emotionally entangled. It dies when you become emotionally separate. This is the pivot point where everything changes. The moment you realize you control your attention, and therefore, you control what influences you. Now, let's turn this understanding into something you can apply in your own interactions, silently, effortlessly, and ethically. So how do you turn this kind of clarity into something practical, something you can carry into real conversations, real relationships, real decisions? It doesn't come from force or from trying to appear untouchable. It comes from adopting a few quiet behaviors that reshape the emotional dynamic around you. 6 of them, to be precise. 1. Master the pause. This is where everything begins. A gentle 2-second pause before you respond to pressure or guilt instantly breaks the manipulator's rhythm. It resets the emotional tempo and signals that your mind stays yours. 2. Don't absorb emotions that aren't yours. People who can't be manipulated listen without carrying the emotional weight of others. They understand. Your frustration is yours. My decision is mine. This psychological separation is armor. 3. Ask clarifying questions. Manipulation thrives in ambiguity. Questions like, "What exactly do you mean?" or "Why is this urgent?" force hidden intentions into the open. Clarity exposes games. 4. Don't rush to fill silence. Silence feels dangerous to insecure people, but liberating to grounded ones. When you allow silence to exist, you stop giving manipulators the material they rely on. You're over-explaining. 5. Trust behavior over words. Manipulators perform sincerity. The unmanipulable observe patterns. When actions contradict the story, they believe the pattern, not the performance. 6. Never negotiate your self-worth. This is the deepest shift of all. When your value isn't up for discussion, emotional leverage collapses. Approval stops being currency. And here's the truth that hits hardest. Manipulation fails the moment you no longer treat every interaction as a referendum on your value. Let me know in the comments, have you ever seen yourself slipping into one of these behaviors, or noticed someone who already lives this way? Your insight might help someone else reading. Before we continue, there's an essential truth that can't be ignored. Any psychological skill strong enough to protect you can also be misused. And clarity, the kind that makes you unmanipulable, is no exception. Once you begin to see emotional patterns, once you can read intentions beneath tone, once you no longer absorb guilt or urgency, it becomes very tempting to flip this power outward, to use it on people rather than simply around them. This is where many people take a dangerous turn. Instead of building boundaries, they begin building strategies. Instead of self-protection, They begin using psychological insight as a tool for advantage. But here's the cost. The moment you intentionally weaponize clarity, you stop being unmanipulable, because your ego becomes the new lever. The desire to control others becomes a hook inside your own mind, and manipulators know exactly how to exploit that. True psychological strength is quiet. It doesn't need to win every interaction. It doesn't try to outsmart everyone in the room. It doesn't see relationships as tactical landscapes. The people who remain genuinely unmanipulable share one trait. They don't use their insight to distort reality. They use it to stay aligned with it. Their clarity isn't a tool for dominance. It's a filter that protects their peace. And there's another warning worth saying out loud. When you become harder to manipulate, some people in your life won't celebrate it. Manipulators lose access. People who relied on your compliance feel destabilized. Even well-meaning friends may interpret your boundary as distance. This is normal. It's the social cost of psychological independence. But the right people, the healthy ones, will adjust, respect it, and often feel safer around you because of it. Clarity doesn't damage real connections. It only burns away those built on unspoken control. In the end, becoming unmanipulable isn't about becoming untouchable. It isn't about building walls, shutting people out, or walking through life in a constant state of suspicion. It's something far quieter, something deeper, a shift in the way you inhabit your own mind. When you stop rushing to earn approval, the world softens. When you no longer fear silence, conversations become clearer. When you stop absorbing emotions that aren't yours, your inner world becomes lighter. And when you learn to observe rather than react, the patterns of human behavior finally reveal themselves. This is the quiet transformation. You start choosing rather than being pulled. You start seeing rather than assuming. You start responding rather than defending. And people feel it, not because you announce it, but because your presence changes the emotional gravity of the room. Those who once tried to steer your decisions find their hands slipping off the wheel. Those who relied on guilt discover it no longer lands. Those who once pushed your boundaries watch them hold steady without effort. You become someone who lives from the inside out, not the outside in. Someone anchored, someone difficult to shake. Someone who can be influenced by reason, but never by pressure. This isn't the end of a journey. It's the beginning of a new way of moving through the world. A way defined by clarity, not fear. By groundedness, not defensiveness. By presence, not performance. If you can cultivate that level of inner stillness, then manipulation doesn't just fail. It becomes irrelevant. Because you're no longer responding to the shadows others cast. You're moving according to your own light.